Jesus. There is no other name like that name. There is no other man like that man, and there is no other God than our God. This is a tremendous reminder to us of the very nature, the very divinity, the very perfection, the very power that we have in and through Jesus Christ. And as we look at this for a moment here together, let us remember that song that we just sang, because it is a great and urgent reminder, a sobering reminder, that in and of ourselves we can't do anything, but in and through Jesus all things are possible. Even the sense of forgiveness. And that's the topic that we're going to look at today. We've been looking at spring cleaning, and I invite you to join me over in Luke chapter 23 today. And we've talked about spring cleaning. This is our third lesson in spring cleaning. And as you can see on the screen, we're going to see what our first lesson was about. What's the point? What's the point of forgiveness? How important is it really? And last week we talked about the process of forgiveness. What's the process of it? Today, however, I want us to look at a powerful secret ingredient. What's the power behind forgiveness? What's the power that helps us in forgiveness? What's the power that allows us to be able to forgive somebody else? This is the secret ingredient when we evaluate it. Everything has a secret ingredient. As you think about cleaning and you think about spring cleaning, I was looking through some images and I came across this one that you'll see. And what you're seeing here is how dry ice is being used to clean in so many things. Who would have thought dry ice would work in cleaning? But you can see the beautiful cleaning that it's doing on that very rusted thing. But they use kind of like a spray washer, a powerful pressure-oriented situation, and they blow dry ice out, and it creates, and it starts to clean and strip away all that is nasty and bad. It just strips it away and gets it back down to this sense of cleaning. Every time we get to spring, we think about spring cleaning. In fact, our church even has a day set aside, usually the Saturday, a week before Easter, and we do spring cleaning. And I just thank the 40-something people that were here yesterday, because you guys did a tremendous amount of work, and we cleaned up classrooms, and we cleaned up in here, and the nice shine that you see in all the wood was done by several of the ladies as they went around, and they just shined up the place. What a tremendous moment that we had. But we think about these things, and we think about how do we clean, and maybe we're thinking about cleaning a window, maybe we're thinking about cleaning our outside or cleaning out the flower beds, but it seems like every spring we're talking about cleaning something. In fact, I had to make a run to Walmart because we didn't have the ingredient we needed in order to do some of the dusting. So I went and got some bottles and brought it back when I was able to do that. Everybody, it seems like, on the internet these days has their own version of what a powerful ingredient would be to use for cleaning. I wonder, do you remember this one?
Want to know the best way to get your stains out in the wash? Well, America's leading washer brands, Maytag and Whirlpool, recommend OxiClean, and now have a dispenser for OxiClean, because they know it's better at getting out the spills, the spots, and the splatters, whether they're ground in, smeared on, or dried up, it doesn't matter. OxiClean lifts away stains detergents can leave behind. Cleaner, brighter, and whiter. That's the power of OxiClean.
Now unleash 2 cleaning powers in 1 detergent. Try new Arm & Hammer Plus OxiClean.
That's what you need. It doesn't matter what your stain, OxiClean. It doesn't matter how long it's been there, OxiClean. It doesn't matter how deep it is, OxiClean. It's like the power of oxygen can just get anything out that you want. But what about the stain of adultery? What about those words that broke a relationship that you can't get back? What about those scars from your childhood? Well, what about those kinds of issues? What about those sleepless nights that you live in fear? What about the abuse or whether it's physical or sexual or mental or emotional? What about those things? What about those stains? What about those scars? What can help us with those things? You see, OxiClean isn't going to get that out. And pressurized dry ice isn't going to get that out. You see, forgiveness takes a very special secret ingredient. And it's not made of this earth. That secret ingredient is Jesus Christ. And what we're going to find in our scripture reference today, we're going to find out what Jesus did. Because there's two things that seem to be on our minds a lot, especially when we think about what's happened to us or possibly what we've done to somebody else or what we've done to God himself. There's two questions that tend to come up and tend to rise to the forefront of our mind, and it's these two questions. How do I receive forgiveness? And how do I give forgiveness? How do I receive forgiveness? And how do I give forgiveness? And so today I want us to look at Luke chapter 23, and our focal verse today is going to be verse 34. We're going to look at how we receive a sense of forgiveness. Look at what Jesus says here. Let me read this verse, and then we'll talk a little bit about the context of what's going on. In Luke 23 and verse 34, it says this, "Then Jesus said, 'Father, forgive them, because they don't know what they're doing.' And they divided his clothes and cast lots." Now, many of you may be familiar about the context. You may understand what's going on, but for some that may not be aware, you don't clearly remember, this is a moment where Jesus is being crucified on a cross. This was the death penalty of the Roman government. This is how they would torture. This is how they would instill fear into all of the other people, that you don't want to cross the Roman government because this is what happens to you. They would line their streets with crosses. They would line their roadways all the way outside of town to try to remember, to help you remember why you don't ever want to cross the Roman government. And Jesus was hanging on such a tree. And Jesus was being crucified in the middle of three. He had a criminal on each side. He was being viewed as a criminal by many, but by others he was not. And as he is hanging on this cross, and I'm not going to go into the cruel nature of that, you're aware of that, and if not, you can Google it. Just be aware that if you have moderate to severe restrictions, you won't see some of the graphic nature of this. It's a horrible thing. It's a terrifying thing. But in the midst of this, look what Jesus says. "Father, forgive them." I don't know if I could do that. In fact, I would suggest to you, there's no way I could have done that. And I think we could all agree, I don't think any of us could do that. The very person, the very people that are doing this to us, Father, forgive them. And yet he gives us this as a reminder that we can forgive and we can receive forgiveness. Look what Jesus does. First of all, we see that Jesus gives this verbal statement, "Father, forgive them." He gives them a verbal statement of forgiveness. He says, "I forgive you." He might have even, in his weakened state, he might have even been able to look down. Can you imagine if you were standing there ready to tear his clothes, roll the dice to see who gets a portion of his clothing, or you're standing off to the side, still holding the hammer that put the nail in his hand, and he looks you square in the eye, and he says, "I forgive you." How powerful this is. To look you right in the eye and say, "I forgive you." Father, forgive them. Maybe he was looking up. Maybe he was saying, "God, Father, forgive them." And he couldn't move. He couldn't barely breathe. And yet they could hear this. Can you imagine how that would feel? This verbal statement of forgiveness. Father, forgive them. I think transcends the moment. I think it moves beyond just that moment. And I believe that in these moments of him being on the cross, he is receiving upon himself physically and spiritually all the sin of humanity. And in that moment of receiving all the sin of humanity, God is not even able to watch what's happening to his Son. And his Son, Jesus Christ, in the midst of all of this, says, Father, forgive them. And in that moment, it's as if he looked at you and he looked at me and he said, all that they've done, Father, forgive them. Forgive him and forgive her and forgive this one and forgive that one. Father, why don't we just forgive them all? Father, forgive them. How powerful a verbal statement can be. I forgive you. Up until the moment that I would give my heart to Jesus, I had never once apologized for anything that I had done to God. I had no idea I needed to apologize to God. I had no understanding, that I might need to say sorry. I am sorry for what I've done. But before I could even utter a word, before any of us could even utter a word and even start to say, I'm sorry, he says, no, wait a minute. Before you say anything, I forgive you. The weight of that. The thought of that I didn't even say I'm sorry. God already said I forgive. I wasn't demanded to come and clean up before. God just says, it doesn't matter. I've already forgiven you. Father, I forgive him for what he's done. I forgive them. God, before they say a word, I forgive. He took the initial step. He took it first. The Bible would say that no man comes to God except that he is drawn unto him. Jesus took that step. Said, wait a minute, Father, forgive them. They don't even know what they're doing. Those casting lots to tear up his garments and hold on to them, those that were nailing him to the cross, those that were mocking him on the cross, those that wrote the sign that above, oh, King of the Jews, in a mocking way, those that would say, crucify, crucify, and those that would seat themselves in a place like this in 2019, having yet to accept by faith what Jesus did for them. All the same, Father, forgive them, because they don't know what they're doing. They don't even know. They don't understand. They don't get it. And in my agony, Father, forgive them. The power of a few words. Oh, it'll tear your heart out. But not only that, we look at the context and we look at everything that's going on, that Jesus, in verse 33, they crucified him there. He gave a physical sacrifice for this forgiveness. Not only did he give the words and he gave a verbal statement, I forgive you, that you can go back to and you can note and you can say, I get it. God said, I forgive you. But he gave a physical sacrifice. He gave of himself. As we took the bread and the juice earlier, we were reminded that the body was given for us. There was a physical sacrifice given for this forgiveness. There was a spiritual satisfaction that came as a result of all of this, because God had a rule. God had a law that God wasn't going to break, and that law said this: without blood, there's no remission of sin. That without the perfect blood from the perfect lamb, you could not be forgiven. And throughout all of the Jewish history, they would bring lamb after lamb after lamb after lamb and be slaughtered, and blood would be splattered on the priest and the person. And in that moment, their sins were being covered. But in this moment, right here, it is a once for all time that Jesus said, I'm spilling my blood to cover all of you for all time and eternity, because I love you and I forgive you. What a tremendous consideration of the depth of God's love, that he would say it and he would break his own body to meet the spiritual requirements of forgiveness, so that you and I could be forgiven. That when we come to that moment in our life where we realize, I have actually done these things. I've sinned. I need to say I'm sorry, but I realize that nothing I can say is really going to make up for all that I've done. How can anything I say make up for killing Jesus? How could anything I could think of ever make up for that? First of all, it won't. Second of all, we simply come before God. I can't, God. There's nothing I could ever do. See, here's what God has given. He has given his Son in your place. He's given his Son in my place. That if I would choose to accept my wrong, my inability to right that wrong, and accept what Jesus has done for my wrong, God says, I'll forgive you. I will cleanse you. I will make you new again. How do you receive the forgiveness of God? It takes Jesus. And before we're really able to forgive somebody else, we need to have the forgiveness of God over us. Otherwise, we don't really get it. We don't really understand it. And we can't really give forgiveness until we've received forgiveness. So I ask you today, have you received the forgiveness of God through Jesus Christ? Not forgiveness of God based upon your own conjecture of what you do, but the forgiveness of God as stated in Scripture through Jesus Christ. Have you received the forgiveness of God through Jesus? What he did, not what we could do, because we can't do anything. If not, in just a moment, you're going to have an opportunity to come and do that very thing, to accept the forgiveness of God based on what Jesus did. If you've never done that, why not today? Why not make that decision today? And we'll give you a chance to discuss that and talk about that in just a few minutes. But on many people's hearts and minds today is also this idea of, how am I supposed to give forgiveness? How can I give forgiveness? I can't give it if I haven't received it from God. I can't really do that in a way that is long-lasting. How do I give forgiveness? The first thing that we have to realize is the same thing we have to realize in our own heart. Forgiveness is possible. Forgiveness is possible. You see, there's nothing that you've done so bad that God can't forgive you. There's not a hole too deep that his arm can't reach you. There's not a distance too far that God can't find you. There's not a sin too dark that he can't clean. There's nothing that you and I could ever do that God can't reverse. There's nothing that says, hey, I've gone too far. No, you haven't gone too far, because you're still breathing, you're still living, you're still hearing the message of God in this moment right now. There's nothing that says God can't get you. You're still here. You still have a chance. You can still have a moment. You can still receive that forgiveness. And if it's possible for you, if it's possible for God of the universe to forgive you the death of his Son and the sin of your life, I think it's possible. I think it's possible to forgive our mom or our dad or that friend who spoke ill of you or that relationship that's broken or that person that you can't stand. I think if God can forgive me, then I can forgive my brother. But we have to understand it's possible. It's possible. If we don't think it's possible, we have to start there. Understand it's possible that it can happen. Because then we just simply have to choose. We have to make a choice. Forgiveness is a choice. We've discussed that on a couple of occasions. Forgiveness is a choice. I choose to forgive. I choose to let it go. I choose to understand that I'm not saying what you did is right, but I'm going to let it go so that it doesn't control me any longer. Change will happen in your heart when you realize the pain of staying where you are is greater than the pain of forgiving that individual. When you come to that moment and realize that the pain you're in now is worse than the pain of forgiveness, you'll make strides toward forgiveness. Because that's where freedom's going to be. That's where you're going to find the freedom of your own heart and of your own life. Make a list and start with the easiest person if you need to. You know, that's what we do in a lot of areas of life, isn't it? I mean, if I have several things I have to do all at once, I'll make a list of what I need to do. And my nature tends to be, I want to mark off several things today. So I'm going to hit those easy targets first, right? We all do this. Now some of you may say, I'm going to get that hard thing out of the way first. Not me. I make a list of 10 things. My eyes go straight to what's the easiest. Because I like the thrill of saying, I got that one done. And then I go to the next part. Well, hey, I got that one done. And I can get to the end of the day, man, look what I did. I got a lot accomplished today. Many times we have many people that we ought to forgive. And some of those we just haven't. And some of those are very hard. Because there's deep-seated wounds. There's issues that are hard to get through and hard to get over. But make a list. And consider the same 3 things that Jesus did. He gave a verbal statement. He gave a physical sacrifice to find a spiritual satisfaction. That person may not ever receive it, may not ever admit it, may not ever want it. But I'm telling you, you need to give it for you. They may never receive it. In fact, I suggest to you that that person may have already passed, and you have no way of speaking to them. But you're still holding on to this. I forgive you. It may not be appropriate for you to go talk to that person. It may not be a moment that you get. You may not have that opportunity at all. But you need to verbalize the words, I forgive so-and-so. You put that name out there. I forgive him. I forgive her. I forgive. By the power of God, not of me. Because in our human condition, we want them to rot a while. But in God's love, he says, I need you to forgive them. I need you to forgive them for your own good. I forgive you. There may be a physical sacrifice you have to make. You may have to eat crow pie. You may have to humble yourself. You may have to hold your tongue to say other things. Certainly chain up your mind so it doesn't continue to think things. But in that moment, there's a spiritual satisfaction that occurs that brings a sense of relief and a sense of release and a sense of peace that you haven't ever experienced. Whether you need to receive forgiveness or whether you need to give forgiveness, it's the same secret ingredient. It's Jesus. It's always been Jesus. It always will be Jesus. What about you today? Do you need to receive or do you need to give? What are you going to do?